argue against someone and be ruthless. But nevertheless, I honestly feel that, if you feel that you have something that could benefit society in terms of what you're talking about, then age shouldn't matter. I'm a third-year law student from the International Islamic University of Malaysia. I'm half Malay, half Australian, if anybody has questions. And I was born and raised in Malaysia, so no question about the authenticity about how I am. Alright, so the topic that I'm going to talk about is gender equality for the youth from a fellow member of the youth. Why exactly? I just feel for the longest of time, and even up to now, there's been such a taboo in society about gender equality, about feminism. What is it? Are they these men-hating women who walk around with mugs that have pictures of cheers that say men cheers on them? And hopefully by the end of my speech, I can make the topic somewhat more relatable and to ground the issue to make it feel like it's not just a theory that's floating around in society. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a master's student in gender studies, although I wish I was. But I realized that you honestly don't need all of that to do your part to bring gender equality in society. It is untrue that we should leave this issue and the plight of it to be fought for the few elites who are given the privilege and opportunity to seek that education to bring about gender equality. But in all honesty, the reason that truly made me feel like this was a topic that is very much relevant for our youth in today's society was because of a conversation that I actually had with my 16-year-old nephew. He's a bright young man, okay? He's so eloquent in speaking. He reads news probably more than the average adult does. He watches Discovery and the History Channel for fun. So you can imagine my shock when, or at least I was taken aback a little bit, when he told me that I don't believe in feminism. I find gender equality weird, and I asked him why. And he said it's because, well, feminists, all they do is they hate on men and they whine and they don't really bring about much change. And I asked him, so if you're not for gender equality, what are you for? And he told me that he was for meninism, right? Which is this new group that has come about in our society for the past year or two, or at least a proper slogan and identification was created. So I didn't know where to start in having this conversation and explaining it to him. Feminist is the person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. Feminism, in my opinion, based on much research and based on being a huge fan of that song, is that feminism fights for gender equality whereby both sexes should be afforded the same respect and opportunity. So the usual question that comes from this deduction is, well, if they're so noble and they're so great and innocent, why do they come off as man-bashing? From my understanding, feminists, or at least majority of them, don't hate on men. They hate on the patriarchy. These are two very different things. Men are men, right? Their biological defaults tell them they're men. The patriarchy, on the other hand, is a social structure that tells us we all have our respective gender roles and the specific role of women is to be subservient to men. Therefore, there are such things as non-patriarchal men, and there are such things as patriarchal women. What is a non-patriarchal man? A non-patriarchal man is like your friend Joe in class, who's tired just because he's a man, he's expected to be buff, and he's expected to not show any emotion because the moment he cries, people tell them, stop being such a girl. And he's tired at people telling him you can't go to dancing school because it's a female thing to do. You should be a man, you should go out and do business. So, in all honesty, when we say we're fighting the patriarchy, we're not fighting against men. We're fighting against those who believe that these gender roles should be a default setting and there's no way we can opt out of it. But moreover, right, I also think that by virtue of feminism, and by virtue of just having a little bit more understanding of the nuanced groups that exist in, the huge banner of feminism, is that, sure, some feminists are radical, some will say that this world is better off without men. But that's not reflective of all feminism. It's like any other group we identify with. There are going to be radicals in that group. There are such things as moderate feminists. There are such things as cultural feminists who fight for things that are really not that alien and foreign after all, right? They fight for things such as, equal pay. They fight for the rights of being able to wear the burqa or being able to wear knee-high length skirts to enter into official buildings, or even the right to change certain laws when it comes to rape and ensuring that the victims get protected and the perpetrators are punished without having to go through technicalities that are unnecessary. Like any other group, honestly, like if you think about it, in religion, in race, like there are Muslims out there who will say, sure, some Muslims are terrorists, but that's not reflective of all of Islam. There are, some Buddhists out there who are violent, but that is most definitely not reflective of what Buddhism is. And the same way with race as well. You're going to have that annoying aunt that tells you, you cannot marry that person who is from a different race. But that's not reflective of everybody who comes from that race. So why is it that when we talk about feminists and feminism, we hold them to a different standard? That you have to be homogenous, that you have to be a monolithic block that fights for one thing, otherwise you are seen as toothless. I don't think that's fair, and I hope that at least this would give us a little bit more understanding and allows us to give them a little bit of that benefit of doubt in terms of still acknowledging the plights that they have done. Because if it weren't for feminism, without meninist in the picture, women wouldn't be able to work now, and women wouldn't be able to wear like fabulous striped pants talking at a tech talk event. So the next question then becomes, what is meninism? Because you're going to have to compare the two. It's unfair for you to make these evaluations in a vacuum. Well, as much as I was taken aback by what my nephew said, I thought, okay, hold on. I shouldn't just be overwhelmed with emotions and grant meninists the benefit of the doubt and just do my little research. So based on what I know about meninism, it's basically a group formed primarily by men who feel that their rights are underrepresented in status quo. Those rights can be either rights for paternal leave, or just in general wanting to fight and balance out the overwhelming influence that they believe feminists have over society. To which I have two responses to. Firstly, to the paternal leave. And the principle that I'm deducing from this example is that meninists basically want to fight for the rights to take on roles that would have otherwise be seen as traditionally only meant for women. If you think about it, that's what gender equality wants. That's what feminists want. They're not just fighting for the rights of women to do manly things, but they're fighting for the rights of men to also take on traditional women roles. What they want is to make gender roles fluid so that all sexes can participate in those different roles without being judged. And the point at which we can acknowledge that the female traditional roles, such as staying at home and being a mom, or showing emotion and crying as a sign that is not reflective of weakness, but something that can be a symbol of strength, then maybe then men can also co-opt into the ability of taking on those roles. Maybe then Joe can go to the dancing school that he wanted to. I'm sorry, I have really close friends with Joe, so fighting for his rights here too. But generally, what I'm trying to say is that gender equality is not something that is exclusive to one gender. It's called gender equality. It's because it recognizes the different genders that exist within society. So the second question then becomes, are they really there to balance out, is meninism really there to balance out the overwhelming influence that feminists have? The first response, and probably the overarching response that I have to that is, what overwhelming influence? The fact that individuals in society are scorned upon the moment they say, I am a feminist. The fact that when women are harassed, the first question they're asked is, what were you wearing? The fact that for centuries, we've had cultures and religion who assign certain gender norms that have been so difficult for us to weed out no matter how much of an injustice it has caused in society, shows that feminism
as much as I'm able to speak about it here in public, is not such a popular thing in society, and it does not have that overwhelming influence. And speaking of feminism, just to show you how real the situation is, I think about 2 years ago, I had a friend, a hijabi friend, and she was debating in America, and she was in a room with primarily men were in that room, and primarily Americans. So before she spoke, and before she was about to give her speech, they were laughing at her. I mean, they weren't like laughing openly, but you can tell the little smirks, the little annoyance, the disinterest in wanting to listen to what she has to say. And as soon as she started talking, you can hear all of that simmering down, and they started listening. And after the debate, they came up to her and they said, "That was a really good speech. I mean, wow, for a woman, for someone of your background to speak that well, I mean, props, man." To me, that's unacceptable. I understand, it probably came from a good place. They probably had well intentions, they meant it as a compliment. But the fact that that compliment came from a place of them recognizing that a woman who came from that background is expected to not be able to speak so eloquently, and the fact that she was able to disprove that myth was worthy of a compliment, whereas in comparison to if that were a man, it would have been expected, shows that we do start off in a world where gender equality was very much real. I mean, when I heard that story, all I could think of was, oh my God, gender inequality is real. It is so real, it is not a myth. The fact that I'm at a debating competition and I'm supposed to be surrounded by some of the most non-judgmental intellectual people, and I am still facing gender inequality. You know it's the problem when you're running to your safe haven and still you can't escape gender inequality. You know it's real. So the point of me giving this speech is to tell you, as a youth, as a youngster, gender inequality is not a theory that feminists fight for. At one point in time, it's going to come smacking on your face, and it's going to create some form of a barrier, whether blatantly or subtly, in your pursuit of getting education. Or at least it did for me, and I pray to God that it does not happen to anyone in this room or anyone out there. But with that being said, right, I feel that gender equality basically fights for the ability for us to do things that would liberate us, to do things that would liberate us. And in the process of that, we're going to have discussions in terms of realizing what norms should we keep, what norms should we weed out. But in order for that discussion to even happen, I mean, God, we have got to get people to the negotiating table first. If currently we feel that there's only so little that we can do, and let's just leave it up to the few individuals who do have a master's in gender studies to do it, it's either we're not going to get that change, or it's going to take a really long time before we get that change. And I can't let that happen. I don't think society should let that happen. We need to realize that in order for us to come to a consensus that there are certain norms that we should be okay with and certain norms that we shouldn't be okay with, we should have that discourse. And like, this is where I'm going to come in and promote debating a little bit. Like, that's why debating is so great, is because I feel that it allows the youth to practice their ability to engage, listen, and respond. And that's probably the key towards creating any change in society, really. And it just so happens that I can't talk about all of the world's problem on the stage. And the one that I feel very attached about is gender inequality. And given the fact that gender inequality is not just a women problem, but also a men problem, I do think that there is a need for all of us to have that realization. I mean, it's like Hermione or Emma Watson's speech in the He for She campaign, when she extended the invitation, not that it was needed to begin with, but it was nice. to hear somebody stand up and tell you that the invite to fight for gender equality is given to everyone regardless of what your sex is. And I'm here to do the same. I'm not here to impose or force you to change and tell you that feminism is the way to go, that you have to give up on certain beliefs. No. I'm here to tell you that whatever decision you make, let it be informed. Don't say that I am a meninist. I don't even understand why there's an extra N-I in it. Shouldn't it be menist? Because if it's feminist, then it's menist. Like, anyways. But if you want to be a meninist, come on, at least do your research towards what you're contrasting yourself to. Because it would be great if all of us realize that at the end of it all, we all have the same goal. Then we should just stop identifying ourselves by these different groups because we want different labels, because at the end we're just going to be debating about semantics and not actually creating that change. So I urge all of you, and to also encourage friends who did not have the opportunity to come to this talk, to fight for gender equality in a way that allows you to be informed of the evaluations you're making. If you don't want to make an informed choice for yourself, at least let it be for the youth who's going to attend TED Talks 20 years down the lane. With that, I thank you.